Hello, happy Thursday? It's Thursday already. I keep forgetting what day it is. I keep feeling like it's Tuesday or Wednesday, but it's in fact Thursday. Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome back to the 12 Days of Christmas, where today we are on the second day of Christmas. Tomorrow I will be streaming again. So just so everyone knows, every day, basically at about this time, every weekday, for the first 12 weekdays of December, I will be featuring a different Dave and doing the 12 Daves of Christmas. Tomorrow, we are going to be streaming at this time to talk about Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports. A lot of you guys in the chat have told me that you think he's the worst Dave. So tomorrow we will delve into all of that. I've been doing a lot of reading on him, and I've got a lot to unpack about him. So we're going to talk about him then. But today we are going to talk a little bit about David Sedaris. Before we get into the stream, I have a couple quick announcements real quick. First of all, as it is December 2nd, in case you guys have forgotten, tomorrow is the last day to vote on the Forever Home Friends cat contest. And if you're new, Forever Home Friends, my small business producing books and plushies about real rescue dogs, except now we are adding a cat as well at the request of many, many people who have said, when are you going to add a cat? When are you going to add a cat? We are now adding a cat. If you would like to learn about the cats and vote for your favorite kitty character, basically we had about 100 people submit stories of cats to enter the contest. We narrowed it down to 5 finalists, and now everybody is voting for the cat they would most like to see a book and plushie about. So if you want to vote, you can head over to our Instagram, Forever Home Friends, and in the bio there is the Google form you can go to vote. Please don't forget you can vote only once. I have seen a few people vote more than once, and I can only count one of each person's vote. So make sure if you've already voted, no need to vote again. Go ahead and vote right here on this form. And if you want to learn information about the cats and see their photos first, on our Instagram, you can see a little description of each cat, a little bit about their life story. I had the full stories in our newsletter that went out earlier this week as well. So go ahead and take a look at the cats. You can see their photos and their stories, and then make sure you vote for them. The second announcement is what I mentioned yesterday as well. This channel does now have Deep Dave merch. So if you are into the Deep Dave series, you can check out, we got the Deep Dave hoodie over here. We got a Deep Dave t-shirt and some other fun little designs. I will link this website in the chat. That is right here on my website, savvylizer.bigcartel.com. And that is where you can get the Deep Dave merch. It's all my original art, which is fun. I did the lettering and the pictures and all that. So go ahead and check that out if you're interested. We have 69 viewers right now, and that is nice. I'm just going to enjoy looking at that number. We're just going to, if we're going to have 69 viewers, that's great. If more people are going to join, we got to make sure it gets up to 420. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about David Sedaris. So David Sedaris, a lot of people have talked about him and mentioned, they requested I talk about him and things like that. He is a writer. He's a pretty well-known writer. I've read some of his work before. We'll pull up his Wikipedia just for a brief background. Oh, we're up to 70 people. That means we now need to get up to 420. Bring people in. So we will take a look a little bit at his career, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the controversy that he was involved in last year. Going into this, I want to be clear. I like him. I think David Sedaris is a cool dude. I think he's a really good writer. I don't have a ton of issues with him. I think that what he did that got him in some controversy and some trouble was not very good, but I think it'll lead us into a discussion that we can have in the chat about where the line between like humor and being serious is, and where the line is when you cross between something to joke about. Basically, we're going to look at what he made this little comedy piece about, was how he wishes he could fire service workers. And the fact that it was like during the pandemic made this something that a lot of people found very rude and insensitive. So I think it's going to be one of those things where it's like, and this is going to be different for everyone. Oh, we're back to 69. Whoever left, thank you. No, just kidding. So the line for what people think is funny versus what people think is going too far is going to be different for everybody, as everybody has a different sense of humor. Everyone has different personal values. But I'm interested in hearing what you guys in the chat think and what everyone thinks about this. So let's say hi to everyone, talk about David Sedaris, his career, his controversies, and then take some more comments from the chat. Jane Ho says, I'm confused. I'm sorry you're confused. Hopefully I'll clear everything up for you. Good morning, Joe, or afternoon, depending where you are. Glad to see you again, Joe. Laura should definitely be doing schoolwork, but is here. I appreciate that, Laura. Jamie's finally catching a live stream. Good to see you, Jamie. Hello, Lori. Hello, Jackie. Hello, Ellen and Ellie and Jack. And LB Hirsch says, am I early? You sure were early because your comment popped up during the stream song, so you were early. Yes, good morning, Cool Gamer. Hello, Anne. Hello, My Melody. Hello, Mirkala. Hello, Brenda Pause. Hello, Calliope. Oh, there's a lot of you guys here. If I don't get to your name, I apologize. Just want to say hello to everyone. Maggie says, ooh, the last day. Oh, yes. So, guys, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my plan. Towards the end, not on the last day, but towards the end of the 12 days of Christmas, I'm going to do a tier ranking chart. One of the streams, instead of being focused on a specific Dave, is going to be like a tier ranking chart where we're going to have like, who are the F tier Daves? Who are the S tier Daves? And things like that. And we could always add more to that chart because there will be more Daves that I cover on this channel in the new year as well, of course. Oh, yay! My Melody rescued 2 cats last year. That's fantastic. That's great. Aw, thank you, Laura. Chewy says thank you. Is Chewy in the mirror? Is that what he was doing? Oh my god, he's such a cutie. Chewy, you're a goof. We love you. Anne says, I never really looked into him. Yesterday I Googled him and the top result was an anti-vax book he wasn't actually involved in at all. Wait, that's weird. I'm going to Google that right now. I didn't see that. Let me look up the anti-vax book. Okay, well now we have more articles to react to. That'll be fun. Oh, the Theranos trial. Ooh, yes, the Theranos trial is going on. Guys, I have the book Bad Blood. I'm going to be reading it. I meant to read it around the same time I was reading Billion Dollar Loser for the WeWork video, but I couldn't read that many like hard investigative journalism books in a row because I was doing other review videos in the meantime. But that's something that I can't forget that I do need to read in the new year. I'll put it on my list right now. Hopefully that doesn't freeze my computer that I'm skipping between tabs. I'm going to put that on my list right now so that I don't forget. YouTube 2022 plans. When am I going to do the Bad Blood book review? Let's say in February I'm going to do the Bad Blood book review. February Bad Blood book review. Guys, right now I'm reading Girl Defined's book for next week on Your Morning Guru. We're going to follow Girl Defined. So I'm listening to their audiobook while I walk Chewy. And it's bad. It's bad. It's bad. A lot of people compare Girl Defined and Classically Abby, but I think Girl Defined is objectively worse. So all right, hello to everybody. Hello, friends. Will the cat book plushie be available for Christmas? Not for this year Christmas, for next year Christmas, because we're just deciding on the character right now. Then I gotta write the book. If I'm gonna do the art, that'll take a while, but I think I'm gonna hire an illustrator for it, so that'll take a while. I gotta get my mom to make the plushie design, then I gotta send it to the manufacturer. So it'll be a couple months in production, definitely, but it should be available for next year for Christmas. Absolutely. Absolutely. Jean, yes, I am going to need biblical commentary this week, actually. I am going to need biblical commentary. For the 12 days of Christmas, we are going to cover King David from the Bible because he's the original Dave. He is the first Dave. And I believe we're going to cover him on next week, a week from today, on Thursday the 9th. Jean, will you be available next week at this time? Because if so, we'll cover King David that day, because I remember you had some interesting knowledge about him. So let's take a look at David Sedaris now. We're going to talk a little bit about some of his books, some of his work, and then we're going to go into the controversy that he was involved in. And then someone mentioned that the anti-vax book that he wasn't involved in, so I Googled that and pulled up some more articles. So we're going to take a look at a couple of his controversies. Let's start with his Wikipedia page, the most obvious place to start. So for just background information, he's basically a comedic author. He's a guy who writes books that are meant to be funny in tone, often a little satirical, mostly memoirs and essays from his own life. And I read his book. Which one is it? It's the book called Me Talk Pretty One Day. I read this book because when I was in high school, I would read a lot of his work for, like, when I was on the speech and debate team and I wanted to do like a dramatic reading of a piece, like a prose piece or something. I would look at David Sedaris was a common thing that a common writer that a lot of people looked at to be like, oh, his work is funny, but it also has a lot of meaning. I don't think I ended up ever using one of his stories for a competition because a lot of his stories are so much written from the male perspective that if I as a woman performed them, it wouldn't probably wouldn't resonate with the audience. Like I remember there was one that I really liked, but at the end it was clear that it was about being a gay man or something, because it was about like how he went to take guitar lessons and his guitar teacher told him he should give the guitar a woman's name because that would help him like connect with the guitar emotionally, and he realized he wanted to give the guitar a man's name. And I was like, if I perform this, because in college I think you're allowed to change some of the wording. In high school that's the thing, you're not allowed to change any of the wording. So if I had performed it, it would have been weird. I would have had to have flipped it the other way and been like, I want to give the guitar a woman's name, you know what I mean? It wouldn't have worked otherwise. So anyway, that was I attempted to perform some of his work sometimes, but it didn't really work for me. But I do think he's pretty funny. I think he's a good writer. He's had a good impact. But let's take a look at the controversy. So in December of 2020, he got involved in a little bit of a controversy when he went on the CBS Sunday morning show. Y'all, I used to watch a CBS Sunday morning show nonstop. I loved some Charles Osgood in the morning. So let's take a look at what he said and what he did that got him in a little controversy. I put this on 1.75 speed, and I'm going to pause frequently. So if someone tries to copyright claim me, you know who tried to copyright claim me recently? Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart copyright claimed us on Your Morning Guru for reacting to a video of her baking a pecan pie. And I was like, excuse me. So I contested it. Hopefully we get the monetization back. Yesterday, the Deep Dave on Dave Hollis was very briefly demonetized, but now it's back. So we're good. We're all good on that one. Heidi's copyrighted music did not destroy me, thankfully. So we're going to pause this frequently. And this is the clip. Basically on CBS Sunday morning, David Sedaris was a guest star on the show. And he had his little segment where he was basically doing a little comedy performance. And it was basically him doing a reading of like a comedy piece. So the idea was it was meant to be kind of satirical and funny, but it also came off a little wrong, and that's why we're going to look at some articles and some reactions that people had, and we'll also look at some reactions in the comments. And a lot of this as the comments say, this leads into a discussion about punching up versus punching down and what that means in comedy, and I think that there is some validity to that. So let's take a look. All right.
A new sort of citizen activism has contributor David Sedaris all fired up.
Oh, maybe I need to put it on 1.5. Don't copyright claim me, David.
During this difficult time when so many Americans are looking for work, I'd like to introduce an idea for something I'm calling the citizen's dismissal.
So I apologize for the video being quiet. This is just the video as it's uploaded. It's just quiet. I can barely hear it too. I turned it up all the way. But basically what he starts off by saying is he's advocating for the citizen's dismissal. It's like the citizen's arrest, basically.
It's like a citizen's arrest, but instead of detaining someone, you get to fire them. Take this lifeguard at a YMCA I went to.
So his whole thing, okay, so he says, like a citizen's arrest where a citizen can arrest somebody, if you are detaining or if you want to do a citizen's dismissal, you should be allowed to fire anybody. A citizen, you don't have to be their employer. This is basically what he's saying. And it's meant to be a joke, but I can see how in the middle of a pandemic, this didn't come off very well. Oh, I'll check if it has subtitles. Hold on. Does it have subtitles? Where are the subtitles? Shouldn't it have them here? Does it not have them? Maybe it doesn't have them. Or would that be down here? No. Because I don't think it has subtitles. If I'm looking in the wrong place, someone let me know. But I don't think it has them. But I will, after he said, I'm going to be pausing frequently so I don't get claimed anyway. So hopefully we'll be fine.
Bought a guest pass so that I could swim laps. And 10 minutes after I'd started, the young woman blew her whistle, calling, "You all have to leave now."
Okay, so the example he gives is that he goes to the pool and paid for the day pass, and the lifeguard blows her whistle and makes him leave 10 minutes after he arrived.
How come, I asked. "I have to go to my parents' house," she said. I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. "I'm going there to do some laundry," she told me. "And then I'm going home." "Oh, you're going home, all right," I wanted to say, "because you are fired."
Okay, so basically he's saying this lifeguard said she wanted to go home. She was making everyone leave because she wanted to go home early. And he was like, oh yeah, you're going to go home. I'm firing you. So he wishes he could have fired this lifeguard on the spot to get back at her for making him leave the pool.
I'd have liked to do the same to a salesperson who worked at a store where my sister and I bought a number of very expensive cups and saucers. The woman rang them up, and after I paid, she stood there blinking. I'm afraid I haven't got anything to put them in, she said. No bubble wrap or bags. So we should what? Just carry the cups and saucers in our hands?
So he and his sister bought these expensive cups and saucers, and the lady at the who was ringing them up has nothing, that they don't have any bubble wrap or packaging to carry them in. And he's like, what? I just have to carry these around in a box where they could get smashed?
Sister asked. Well, they're yours, the woman said. You bought them. Do you have a purse? I wanted to ask. If so, you need to get it and go home. My sister and I are firing you.
So he wishes he could have fired that lady in that moment.
I'm not suggesting that we go crazy with this. We all have our off days. Certain people, though, could easily be replaced by go-getters who'd say, I've got an idea. Let's wrap your pottery in my socks and underwear. Or you could use your own if you have a thing against germs. That's the kind of person I want to deal with.
So this is the part where it's clear that he's making a joke, right? Where he's like, you could, if we fired that woman, someone who replaced her would say, oh, I'll use, we could use your socks and underwear. Let's be creative. And it's like, well, also you can think of that idea yourself, but it's supposed to be a joke. So I'm like, how the joke is landing is a little rough. I think it is. Yes, it is supposed to be satire. Yes, it is supposed to be satire. That's the thing people are getting. Like, he's not saying this sincerely. He is a satirical writer. This is not meant to be serious. But at the same time, I'm worried that, and this is just my subjective perspective. Someone else might have watched it and say, no, the satire hit hard and this was hilarious. For me, it's just the joke isn't really landing, because one of the key things of satire is it has to be clear who you're satirizing. And it's like, is he writing this from the perspective of a disgruntled boomer and trying to make fun of his own demographic of people in their 60s or whatever? Is that what he's doing? Or is he making fun of service workers? Is that who he's satirizing? It's not clear really, because I don't think it takes enough of a stance in the satire. And that's just my opinion. But that's kind of how I see it. Yeah.
Someone with solutions. The sort who'd say, if I keep the pool open, could I maybe do my laundry at your house? As customers, though, we need to keep our end of the bargain. Of course, you can do your laundry at my place, we'll say.
So this is the part where it's satirical as well, as he's like, okay, so the lifeguard had to leave early to go do her laundry. As a customer, as a worker, if she didn't want to be fired, she should have asked if she could do the laundry at my house. And then I should have said, of course you can do the laundry at my house as a customer. And this is where it gets a little bit weird. So you're like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like, the situation would never happen in real life. And that's where I think he's trying to satirize the like boomer experience of like, oh, everyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. You just got to be innovative and say, do the laundry at my house. And it seems like that's the satirical stance that he's taking, but it's just not clear if he's talking about his own perspective or if he's putting on a character here. And maybe I don't have enough ability of nuance to pick up on that, but I just couldn't really tell. Yes, exactly what you're saying right here. J.K. Turgley saying, I think he's satirizing the boomers, but he's disconnected enough from the group he's trying to satirize that it doesn't land. That's exactly how it feels to me. I don't think he's trying to be dismissive to service workers, but I think that the way he's going about the satire doesn't land, and it doesn't come off as clear satire. So I think a lot of people are taking it seriously. And like Brittany Phillips says, as a former retail worker, this makes me irrationally angry, even though I know it's satire. So it's still done in a way that is making people upset, as opposed to something. I think if he played up the character more and was like clear that he was like this was a fully satirical piece, then it might have been like, oh my God, yeah, this is to make fun of all the people. If he played up himself as a really awful person, for example. Let's see.
Just need to throw in some socks and panties. I promise to return to someone who, like you, is really good at her job.
Okay, so the whole thing is that he's like, you can do the laundry at my house, but I have to also wash the socks and underwear from the lady who packaged up my cups and saucers. So that's the whole thing. And a lot of people were like, this seems like a punch down. This seems like, that he's kind of going, looking down on service workers. So let's take a look at some of the reactions to this. Yeah, as Amy says, I think the rise of the Karen has made this satire too hard to judge. Satire works best when it's exaggerated enough, not too much, but still out of the realm of possibility, right? And I think that this was performed too straight-faced to be clear that it was satire. That's the problem. That's why I think people's reactions was interesting. So I'm not saying, I don't necessarily, again, like I've said, I still like him as a writer. I still think he's a cool guy. He's not on the level of some of the Daves we cover. I don't think he's a terrible person or anything. I just think it's more of like, I think it's more of a failed joke that didn't land. And I think part of the problem is that whether or not you intend for something to be hurtful, if you're a professional writer, if you're a professional communicator, you're a professional performer, your job is communicating with an audience. And if the audience doesn't receive the message that you're trying to give, and if a few people don't, maybe they just weren't your right audience, but if the majority of people don't receive the message that you're trying to give, or it doesn't land for them, then it's possible that you didn't deliver the message effectively. So I think it's more of a failure on his part there. And I think it's also funny that you brought up the Karens, because yesterday we determined that male Karens are Daves. There's Karens and Daves. And if anyone here is named Karen or Dave, I'm sure you're still a great person and I love you. Poe's law is too strong when trying to lambast boomers. Yes, I think so. So let's take a look at some of the reactions or some of the backlash that came from this. And then after that, we can take a look at what someone was mentioning about the anti-vax thing. Male Karens are Kens? No, they're Daves. So this is from the site The Wrap. I'm gonna get an ad blocker at some point. I do have an ad blocker. I just don't like it because it gets in my way for some things. Here we go. Okay, so this article from The Wrap says, it's advertising a movie on the sides too. You can ignore that. David Sedaris catches heat for suggesting people should be able to fire service workers. And it specifically mentions here that he's a satirist. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. The satirist suggests citizen's dismissal like a citizen's arrest, but for other people's employees doing a bad job. So here is what the article says. Acclaimed author and satirical humorist David Sedaris is getting slammed online this weekend after publishing a short video essay for CBS in which he suggests ordinary people like himself should be able to fire service workers who don't perform to the customer standards. He framed the idea, which he called a citizen's dismissal, as a way to free up jobs for other, more competent people looking for work. But that didn't exactly translate to the majority of people who read his commentary. The citizen's dismissal, Sedaris said, would be like a citizen's arrest, but instead of detaining someone, you get to fire them. He came up with this idea after a recent series of unpleasant run-ins with service employees. In the most bourgeois example of them all, Sedaris wrote that he and his sister, comedian and actress Amy Sedaris, bought a number of very expensive cups and saucers, only to find that the person checking them out didn't offer anything to put them inside since the store was somehow out of bubble wrap and bags. So this is just kind of the summary of what happened. The idea that he took time to dunk on essential workers didn't land well online, considering putting people out of work during a pandemic is just asking for negative karma to drop on your head. One Twitter user even said Sedaris went full Karen in his remarks. There we go, guys. Someone mentioned Karens. Male Karens are Daves. There we go. There we go. And also, Cutie Pie Mania 45 brings up a great point. Not a white man saying citizen's arrest in 2021, right? It's also a little insensitive to joke about citizen's arrests at this time. I guess to be fair, he said it in 2020, but that's just as bad. Just in case any stands in the chat are like, he didn't say it in 2021. Not that that's relevant at all. But anyway, the point is the climate has been such that like citizens' arrests as a concept have led to so much racial profiling and so much violence that it's a weird thing to be joking about, especially without drawing the line between what is a joke and what is meant to be taken seriously. So that is another angle that very well could have been hurtful to a lot of people. I completely agree. Divine, oh, this is interesting. Divine Renegade says, you guys are all making David Sedaris' point for him. Customer service doesn't get paid enough to care about the customer and give them service. Shrug, you're fired. Well, that's kind of, wait, how is the chat making his point for him? I'm confused about your comment. It's an interesting point, so I want to hear what you have to say. The point that he's making is that he wants to be able to fire them. But I think the point is that he's trying to make fun of the Karens of the world who want to be able to do that, but it's not clear if he's trying to make fun of them or if he's actually siding with them. That's the part that's I'm not clear on what your comment means, but if you could elaborate, I'd be happy to look more into it. So he says, Charlotte Clymer tweeted, I love David Sedaris' writing. I'm very familiar with his our sardonic style. Charlotte Clymer tweeted Saturday, and y'all, this goes from bad to worse. I was waiting for the punchline or a clever pivot, and it just never came. I have no idea he thought this was what we needed to hear in this moment. I think that's part of the problem was there wasn't like a clear punchline. I don't think that I don't think there's a topic that can't be joked about if it's done correctly. You have to, in order to joke about something, there's a difference between joking about something and being hurtful about something, and whether you're going to oh, Jack says right here, Savvy, you know how you decide not to perform some of his speeches because of how it will be received coming from someone of your demographic. Maybe he should also think about it. That's a good point. That is a good point to think about, like, you know, if I'm trying to communicate this message and I'm giving it from my own perspective, is that perspective something that this message coming from, would it have a more positive or negative connotation? And that's all part of communicating with others and spreading messages, and that's part of being a writer and things like that. So I definitely think that there was something amiss in the way that, yeah, and I agree with Cutie Pie Mania here that it's not the fault of the worker, it's the fault of the corporation. Retail workers are forced to try and push merchandise and help customers while they're going. Yeah, retail workers do not get enough respect. That's a huge issue. And there's a huge issue also with people not being paid enough. We're seeing that now where people are talking about the labor shortage. Well, the labor shortages that are going on are really just companies not being willing to pay people enough to do the type of work that they're requesting, right? It's essentially kind of like a mass strike almost. So if employers raise their prices, more people would be willing to work. And then people say, okay, but how can those companies stay afloat? Well, maybe they have to hire fewer people. Maybe the business model is just failing at this point. There's a lot of other things to take into consideration. And Joanna says, I think most likely he just didn't realize how cultures change and what the current customer-employee relationship is like. That's possible as well. Let's see. Yeah, and DW says, I'm not responsible for a comedian having a bad joke. That's on him. I agree. That's what I'm saying, is there's definitely a line where it's like, is this meant to be, is this funny or is this hurtful? And whether something is funny or hurtful has to do with how it's framed, what the actual message is, who the punchline, who is being made fun of, and how it's constructed and how that comes across to the audience. So you have to take all of that into consideration when you're creating something that's meant to be funny. I think that this failed as a joke. Honestly, I think this failed as a joke, and it was just hurtful more than anything, because I could see so many people, like the type of people that he's supposedly satirizing, like the Karens and the boomers who are too demanding of service workers. I could see those people not getting the joke and taking it seriously and agreeing with him, like genuinely. And because it's not clear enough that that's what he's making fun of. And maybe he wasn't. Maybe I'm being too generous to him. It's entirely possible that he meant this sincerely. I'm really not clear. This whole thing is just kind of a mess. Yeah, as Joanna says, wasn't funny, and this delivery felt too sincere and legit. Due to his age, the viewer's likely to assume he's speaking from the perspective of a customer. I would completely agree with that. Yes. And as Charlotte was saying here in this, the punchline just never came. It didn't have a clear moment where you're like, this is the twist. This was a joke all along. It just left it in this weird gray area where it's like, ooh. So a Twitter user named Chris White said he emailed CBS in response to the video. As a person who works in customer service, David Sedaris' words could have far-reaching negative impacts on many folks like me, White said Sunday. To think they gave this person a platform to spew his nonsense and not to others who truly deserved it. That's a good point, too. Why did CBS Sunday Morning say this is the kind of humor that the world needs right now? Humor that makes fun of service workers. Like, it's kind of a bad idea. So I am going to put on the Be Right Back song because I've been hydrating, like I mentioned. I have to pee. So I'm going to pee. I'll be 30 seconds, be right back. And then when I come back, I will take a look at the comments of what people have to say about this. We'll continue looking at this, look at a few other articles. Be right back. All right, y'all, I am back. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to take a look at some comments, and then we're going to continue with this article and look at more people's feedback. Yes, everyone needs to hydrate. I've been trying to drink a lot of water every day. I have these giant 24-ounce jugs that I've been trying to drink at least 3 of every day, plus all the coffee I drink. So I've been just peeing a lot, which is fine. It's fine. It's just a little annoying, and I appreciate y'all's patience on the stream. So Caitlin says here, I think this is a good perspective. I feel because I'm very well versed in his work that this is obviously satire. But the thing is, you have to get through the whole piece. Having watched the breakdown by Savvy, it shows that if you take it piece by piece, it doesn't land. But the last line is the punchline of the entire story and joke. This was people taking the idea of a citizen's firing out of context and not realizing that underestimate what frontline workers do and how, if we were able to just fire people, it would be awful. So I get that is, yes, I think that that's the satire. And I think that there's also something to be said for if you're familiar with a lot of his work and know that that's his style and you've come to expect that from him, that makes sense. When you have something on TV and the audience is just kind of everybody and not everybody has necessarily seen that, a lot of people might not understand that that's his style, or it might not resonate that way right away. The ending is that he as a citizen wouldn't be able to take on the responsibilities of those workers. So I think there is something to be said for that point. I think that that's a good point, that when you get to the end, there's this whole, that the point that wraps it up right at the end where he's like, I'm at the pool, the lifeguard that I want to fire, instead of firing her, I say, you can come do your laundry at my house, but we have to also do the laundry of the woman who at the store was using her socks and underwear to package up the cup and saucer, right? Because it was like, okay, if I fired these people, if instead of firing these people, right, if I made them do all this extra work for me, the world, if I fired those people and the people who came instead and agreed to my weird standards of do your laundry at my house and use your socks and underwear to package up my stuff, then I would be in a weird position of doing all this laundry and it would be a weird world. It wouldn't make sense. So the idea is that he's like, this wouldn't actually make sense, but he's playing the part of a character who's defending it, right? So I think that is what he was going for. And that's why I'm not calling to cancel him. I don't think he's actually anti-worker. I don't think he actually is someone who doesn't respect service workers in real life. I think that this is just a joke that for a lot of people just didn't land at all because it didn't have a lot of the context that people knew, and because his delivery was a little too straight-faced, in my personal opinion. And it's just such a short clip as well. So I think that what Caitlin is saying makes perfect sense when it comes to, you know, how you could interpret it in something of what he's actually going for. I think that interpretation makes perfect sense. And she continues, he was speaking from his perspective, and the end line is the punchline. He was making fun of himself. Yes, and I think that that's a good point. I think there's multiple interpretations of this, right? And this is why this is a bigger discussion. I don't think that this is just one thing where it's like either David Sedaris is awful or David Sedaris is perfect and deserves no criticism. I think the real truth lies in the middle somewhere, right? Where it's like some humor doesn't land sometimes, and when it doesn't land it can be hurtful, but that doesn't mean that that person was intentionally trying to be hurtful, because what they're doing could make perfect sense to some people and does land for some people, and you can see where he's going with it. So I think that there's a variety of different ways we can look at this situation. And have we gotten to the end yet? We finished the clip a long time ago. Yeah, the clip was very short. It was like a minute long thing. Wait, sorry, I had a lot of things. So DW says it's 2021, a lot of subtlety is dead, and this bit relies on knowing who he is, and it's very subtle. And that's a good point too. I struggle with subtlety, but that doesn't mean that subtlety as a form of humor is bad, right? It means that it's not for me. And so it might have not been for a lot of people either. So again, I think this is interesting. Jack says, I feel like the satire is missing the big picture. We have the Karens, Daves, and the workers, but it's really weird that the corporation and management who make the decisions are never mentioned. And that's a good point too. I mean, I think that if we were looking at it in the best faith interpretation and looking at it from David's perspective of what he was doing here, you can make the point that, okay, the corporations aren't really part of what he's satirizing in this particular piece, and so it's not really relevant to the specific joke that he's making. But if we do want to look at these real world issues in a larger context and look at what is actually going on, then that is a massive piece of the puzzle that's missing, and you're right about that. Yeah, that's the thing. I think it might be a thing where some people don't realize it's satire and think like, oh my god, that actually would be a good idea. Like I could see people taking it that way. And like that is a good point. It's very unreasonable. Like whatever company they were buying the cups and saucers from, it's pretty unreasonable that if you're buying expensive glassware, that the company didn't provide that and it fell on the worker. But again, that probably is part of what he's joking about. That it's like that's pretty ridiculous. But in this world, like I think that's part of the joke, right? That like in this world we expect service workers to be able to solve everything, that a lot of people who are in the Karen and Dave demographics, right, that they demand that, you know, the waiter or waitress, they solve everything, that the person at the checkout counter, that they can solve everything, that every problem is something you can solve, when in reality a lot of these problems are not related to them. It's like, you know, when you see someone at a restaurant and they're mean to the wait staff because they're like, my food order was wrong or whatever, or this food tastes bad. It's like, well, maybe it was the kitchen's fault, or maybe something went wrong somewhere else in the restaurant, or what. Like just throwing blame at the person you directly talk to is very common. And I think part of it might be that he was trying to make fun of that as well. The idea that like, okay, the fact that the company didn't provide the packaging materials is pretty ridiculous. So, but in this world of him playing up this like Karen type of character, he's being like, oh, well, the service worker should just figure out how to solve that by just take your socks off and package it in your socks, like, which is ridiculous. In reality, it is the company's fault. However, I do agree that wasn't brought out clearly enough, and it is easy to miss. So it is something to be said for like, subtlety doesn't land with everyone. It doesn't usually land with me. And now I'm just like overthinking it for the sake of this live stream. And that's what's causing me to come to some of these conclusions, which is good. We should think about literature. We should analyze it. We should look at what the author's meaning is and where he's placing it into context. But I think there's something to be said for both, like the joke doesn't quite land, but I don't think he intended for it to be hurtful, if that makes sense. I think it was like, sometimes you do something that could be hurtful by accident and it's not your intention, you know? So I think there's multiple angles to look at this from. And I agree with Nomi here. This wasn't the best clip for a random appearance on TV. Appreciating his style probably requires some familiarity with his tone. I agree with that. I think that if you're someone who's very familiar with his tone and you read a lot of his work and you heard this, it would be like, oh, that's obviously what he's doing here. Versus if this is your first time ever seeing him, you would be like, what? So I think that maybe this wasn't the best piece to introduce to new people who are new to his writing. I would absolutely agree with that. Cutie Pie Mania says, I don't think customers consider the companies when they're in the store. I say this because people will say, your store, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't own the store. I don't make enough to own the door. That's true. That's true. Absolutely. Amber says, this feels like the Colbert Report being missed as a satire by the people as satirizing. Yes, I noticed that a lot when Stephen Colbert had his Colbert Report show on Comedy Central. A lot of, far right people would think that Stephen Colbert was really on their side. Actually, even some leftists would dislike Stephen Colbert because they thought he was a Republican, but he was trying to satirize like a Fox News type of show. And I think satire does get missed a lot. And it is a shame. It's a shame because it can be a very funny form of humor. I completely think it is. And Celipom says, I don't think the joke works when it's too close to reality. It's hard to find a customer demanding you give the clothes off your back funny when that actually happens in real life. And I would say, like, maybe the pandemic was really not the best time to be making this particular satire, just because I think a lot of service workers were dealing with a lot of people who actually in real life were behaving the way that David Sedaris was making a satire of. So it might have just hit a little too close to home for a lot of people. And I think that is completely fair. And yes, exactly. The pandemic. Exactly. I think that's, yeah, a lot of progressives believe Colbert's character. Yeah, a lot of people miss satire. It's not just a right or left thing or an old or young thing. Satire is just hard sometimes. I'm a very literal person. I have trouble with it sometimes too. So we're gonna continue with this thing right here. So this person, right, that we just read their comment from on this article had mentioned that this potentially could have actual negative effects, right? If for people who don't get the satire and listen to it and think, ooh, that that could be a good idea. And that's true. Like, I feel like he could have played this up more, right? That's why we have all of these, as Joanna brings up, the source material is already practically unbelievable levels of ridiculous. You're absolutely right about that. There are so many people who act ridiculous in a store, who act completely over the top. You know who one of them is? Dave Ramsey. Could have behaved like Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey is a male Karen who's a Dave. He's in the store all the time, losing it at people just asking him to put a mask on, right? We talked about that in one of my deep dives on him. But yeah, so absolutely, there are already all these people who take it way over the top. He could have played up like being one of those characters and gone a little more intense with it if this was going to be on a big, far-reaching program on CBS. That was the first time a lot of people might see him. So I think that, and as DW points out, satire is also very hard in a small clip where you don't know the history of the person. I wish he made it obviously ridiculous with tone or gestures or even a silly accent. I agree. Haley says, this reminds me of how many people respond irately to a modest proposal, which makes the satire hilarious to me. I'm not gonna lie. And that's fair. Dude, I remember reading a modest proposal. Is that the Irish piece about how we're gonna solve the famine by eating children? Is that one? I think that's what it is, right? I remember reading that, I think on like a standardized test. I thought it was funny, but I didn't think it was funny because I knew it was, this is such like a problematic moment of me. I thought I didn't realize it was satire, but I still thought it was funny because I was an edgy teenager at the time that I read it. And I was like, lol, eating children, ha 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 ha. Because I was, if you grew up as a teenager in the mid 2000s and listened to emo music and stuff, that was the norm, right? Was being like that. That's the kind of stuff that you would make fun of at Hot Topic and shit. So I read it and I thought it was funny, but I also didn't realize it was satire. I just thought it was funny that someone was proposing this, which is hilarious to me. And part of it is there wasn't really a lot of framing. That too, as Cutie Pie Mania brings up, there wasn't a lot of framing that it was satire, right? The person who introduced it just said, and here's David Sedaris to talk about something new that is called the citizen's dismissal. And it made it sound like it was just leading into something legitimate. So I think that's fine. Yep. Guys, the mid 2000s were a lot. They were a lot. A lot of people, I think, don't remember how bad they were. When I say bad, I mean like a lot of stuff that people said then you could not say now. And that doesn't mean that it was good to say it then. It just means that like the world was very into like as dark of shock humor as you can get. So a lot of people said things that were just like completely appalling and shocking just to be like, haha, I'm going to hell for this. As I mentioned this morning on the Your Morning Guru stream, but yesterday I watched this video by Jenny Nicholson about BronyCon. And I think that the My Little Pony brony fandom was like the pinnacle. That was like the tipping point, right? The brony fandom was like the tipping point from, you know, shock value and extreme irony tipping point into people being just much more genuine and nicer and not trying to intentionally shock and appall each other. But yeah, so that that was the whole thing where it was like, lol, I'm gonna sexualize these ponies, I'm gonna go to hell for this. That was such a thing in like 2010 time period. And then as we moved into the 2010s decade from the 2000s decade, the world just got nicer and like people stopped being such assholes. But I think the brony fandom was the tipping point. Zeebs hates the brony era. I knew too many bronies back in the day, y'all. Flogustina says, a modest proposal to my first experience with old-time satire. It prepared me to appreciate Shakespeare more than I would have otherwise. So dry. Absolutely. And I just love this. This is such an interesting I love the interesting pop culture analysis of how humor and the way we interact with each other evolves over time. As Anne says, we were beginning to come out of the streamlined 90s where individuality wasn't really valued at all. And I will bring up, I did this video essay on narrowcasting that I talked about. It's because the narrowcasting era was really, narrowcasting era started in the 1920s with local radio stations, but it was really booming with the internet in the early 2000s when suddenly there were communities online. There was content that was tailored to individual people. You started getting things on YouTube that weren't broadcast mainstream. Whereas in the 90s, you watch Friends and Seinfeld. Everybody watched Friends and Seinfeld. Everybody listened to Destiny's Child and NSYNC. And it was like, in the 90s, there was just a lot more, overall everybody got the same, whereas the like rise of internet culture becoming a thing just made it so that suddenly there were divides and people could find what really fit them, and that's what led to a lot of this the ball rolling in these interesting ways. How did it get brought up? Yeah, how did the brony video get brought up in both live streams today? I don't remember how I got it brought up in the first live stream, but it's just on my mind because I watched it yesterday. It was a great video. I love Jenny Nicholson. She's hilarious. Of course Jean has this. Jean was on our call-in show last week on Your Morning Guru and talked about having all of these ancient porn books. I guess that's a part of history now, isn't it? So let's continue with this, but I think this again, I was like, I knew this was going to lead into an interesting cultural discussion. Another reader named Shane Barnes commented and asked if Sedaris had heard of Yelp, the online review site that's dedicated to employee and business feedback. Brave choice for CBS Sunday Morning to air this lame David Sedaris segment in which he dreams of having the power to fire service people, Barnes said. If anything, the David Sedaris thing just really reveals the two bubbles, writer and producer Bridget Fatassi, I'm not sure how you say her name, but although she noted that Sedaris shouldn't be canceled for his comments, only people significantly detached from the working class wouldn't consider that a bit going after service industry workers, an industry that has been ravaged by the pandemic, might not land right now, but no one should be canceled for poorly timed satire. Come on now. I think that Bridget has the best take here. I think Bridget is on the money, where she's like, this was poorly timed satire. He did not mean this as a way to actually make fun of service people. He was trying to make fun of people who are rude to service workers. However, the way that it was a subtle satire that didn't land during a time in the pandemic where people are hearing that kind of stuff every day, yeah, it wasn't the smartest move, and it was actually hurtful to people. So I completely agree here. Completely agree with Bridget. Sedaris definitely wasn't thinking about the strain that unemployment, salary cuts, and furloughs have had on the average American when he sat down to pen his rant about customer service. It's worth noting that in the federal government's November jobs report, the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated it would take up to 40 months for the economy to fully recover from the job losses brought on by the pandemic. Ugh. I mean, this article came out right around the time that the David Sedaris piece came out, which was about a year ago now. So right in the midst of the pandemic. Vaccines were first starting to become a thing only for famous people, right? But it was still like towards the beginning, not in the beginning, I guess we're almost a year into it, but we had been struggling for a while, right? Yes, I agree with Bridget too. I think Bridget is right. Somewhat ironically, Sedaris put out an anthology of his work called The Best of Me through publisher Little Brown, the 63-year-old author who's best known for his writings, including The Santaland Diaries, Me Talk Pretty One Day, and When You Are Engulfed in Flames, hasn't yet spoken on the backlash from his recent comments. So a lot of people are, there's the tweets right here. I don't think we need to cancel him. I think it's a thing where it's really just a matter of learning to know your audience at a specific time. Because whether or not something is a good joke or whether or not something is a good piece of writing, there's going to be an audience that it resonates with and an audience that it doesn't resonate with. This is something I deal with as an author, right? My Forever Home Friends series and my novels do not resonate with the same people. Sometimes they do. But for the most part, Sculpt Yourself, which has lesbian sex scenes in it, and Smile Chewy, which is about a cute little puppy learning to have confidence in himself, are not really for the same people. Now, sometimes there are, some 20-year-old lesbian dog lovers that love both of them. Absolutely. But overall, a lot of times your audience isn't going to be the same for the same piece, for different pieces of work. And it's important to know who the audience you're talking to is and how to convey that message best to them, right? The way I am on my YouTube channel and the way I am when I write an article for a magazine and the way I am when I write a book targeted at kids and the way I am when I write a book targeted at adults, all completely different. And it's not to say that I'm a different person. It's to say that the way that I put ideas and thoughts together, the way I convey humor, the way I convey emotions is different because I'm trying to tailor that to the group of people that are going to be listening to it based on what knowledge I know that they have, based on what understanding of things I know that they have, and how to best convey that message and have it come across effectively. I think that's an important part of being a writer. So my novel, okay, so just by the way, Sculpt Yourself, it doesn't have graphic sex in it. I probably overplayed that a little bit. It has a tasteful fade to black, but there is a lot of lesbians in it. My Sculpt Yourself's on Amazon. I'm gonna hopefully have signed copies back on my website before too long. 90s Kids is my other female LGBT novel, but that one's YA, so it's not very sexual, but it is romantic. That one's also on Amazon and on my website, with the same website I showed earlier with the Deep Dave merch. This is, guys, just because we're talking about making sure everyone understands satire, this is a dig at Dave Hollis right here. Just so no one thinks that Emery is making an actual dig at someone. This is a Dave Hollis reference, right? Dave Hollis going, "Why do you follow me if you don't already own my book?" Right? That's a joke about Dave Hollis. Nobody here needs to buy any of my books. Emery, I got your joke, but I'm like, just because our whole conversation today is about like when satire doesn't land, I'm like, oof, if Emery's satire here doesn't land, I'm gonna feel really, really, really bad. So guys, this was a satire about Dave Hollis right here. Dave Hollis's rant where he's like, "Why do you follow me if you don't own my book? Just why do you follow me?" The joke being that it's ridiculous to demand that someone buys your book just because they follow you. See, okay, good. Ellie, I'm glad I explained it then, because I don't want you to feel bad. Ellie, you're awesome. I love you. I'm really glad you're here. It's the patio of peace. Now the book jingles in my, yeah, okay, good. I'm glad I explained that. But see that, guys, right here in the chat, that was a brilliant example of what David Sedaris is dealing with, and what the audience is dealing with. It's a brilliant example right there, because Emery makes a satire that to me is obvious because I've done all these Dave Hollis videos. Now, if you're not familiar with my work, if you haven't seen all of that stuff that I've covered in the past couple months, this might actually sound like Emery's telling people in the audience, "Oh my God, why would you even follow Savvy if you don't buy her books?" Which, of course, the joke being that when Dave Hollis said that, it was ridiculous and like so stupid that you would say that in the first place. And then because Ellie is newer to the chat, she was like, "Oh, I'm glad you told me because I didn't get that at first." So look at that. Look at how it happens. Look at how it happens right here in front of our very eyes. Look at that. You guys are great. You guys are great. Never feel pressured to buy a book to stay here. That was a thing when we did that was another example. We were on the Your Morning Guru stream the day after Dave Hollis went on that rant, and we did this satire where we were like, why are you guys even watching our show if you don't own Cancel Sean Boston? Like, why? We have 2,000 followers and we've sold less than 2,000 copies. So clearly, and we're going on this rant where we're like, and we even said this is a Dave Hollis parody, and then a few people bought it and we were like, please return it to Amazon, get your money back if you didn't actually want it. But then some people were like, we did actually want it, it was just a reminder. And I'm like, okay, but like, we're just making a joke here. I think people use like /s for satire sometimes to indicate satire online. So right here, like, well, this is how like, again, this wasn't framed as satire, and I think that's part of the problem. CBS says David Sedaris demands the right to fire others. And this is the show that he was on, tweeting it like this. They're making it sound completely serious. It does mention that he's a humorist, but it says he suggests the power of a citizen's dismissal, like a citizen's arrest, could revolutionize customer service. And it's like, it's not very clear from that. So I would say that is that's just an interesting look at some of the backlash he got for that. Let me see if there's anything else I can pull up about this too. 1 second, my computer's freezing. Well, I will take a look at some comments. I can't pull up any comments because the screen's frozen, but let's see. Yeah, I didn't know about the /J one. I thought you had JK when you were joking. You just said JK. Or you could use an emoji. Yeah, I think that /s people do use on Reddit often. They say like /s if it's meant to be sarcasm. Okay, so got an article on Yahoo. Let's see if this has any different information or if it's the same. Yeah, oh, it's the exact same article. They just basically reprinted it. So this seems to, I think this brought up an interesting discussion about all of this. I'm really curious on people's thoughts for all of this in the comments. And I really love that there's a good discussion going on about this in the chat. And if anyone's watching on replay, please leave comments and let me know your thoughts on this. I definitely think this was a case of the intention and the effect were different, which can happen sometimes. That's bound to happen online. And that's why I don't think David Sedaris should be canceled. I don't think he should be known as like a horrible guy or like a super like privileged asshole forever. But I think it's totally fine to criticize the way that his joke didn't land. And it's totally fine to say this joke was hurtful because it didn't land for a lot of people. And then for some people who thought the joke did land and enjoy it, there's nothing wrong with having thought it landed and enjoyed it. That's just, I think, a perfect example of how certain types of communication really resonate with certain people and really don't resonate with other people. And that's why we have to be careful with really knowing and understanding our target audience. It's what I talk about with being a business owner all the time. A lot of times when I review a book by, like the other week I reviewed Jen Sincero's book, You're a Badass at Making Money. And I said, who is the target audience for this book? Who could possibly be the target audience? Because the solutions she's proposing aren't things I've seen anyone have a problem with. Like, it's if the target audience of your work is not clear, then you end up running into a lot of people who are like, what the fuck are you talking about? And you get into a lot of issues. So, Lisa B brought up, it's not super relevant, but I did meet David Sedaris randomly, and he was the sweetest human. That's great. That's so good to know. He does seem like he would be a nice person who has a big sense of humor. When you make a career out of writing and comedy, you're bound to have some jokes that don't land. You're bound to have some books that suck. I think some of my books probably suck. I don't know which ones because I'm too close to the material. No, I do know which one's Beauty King. That one sucks. It's not a very good book. But I keep it out there because I don't want to hide from my past as a worse writer. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. I don't know what the right way to go about that is. Celipalm says, seems like this is an example of needing to someone to pitch your ideas to who's willing to criticize you, so you know if you're executing the idea well. And I think that's a good point. There's a need for a lot of getting feedback, getting criticism. We do this in the writing world all the time, right? You write a first draft, you get your critique group or your beta readers or whoever to read it, give you feedback, you work that in, you work with your editor gives you feedback, you go through a developmental editing stage where they give you feedback on story arcs and elements of the plot and the characters and the dialogue and things like that. You work on that. You go through copy editing where they work on your line edits and your grammar and your sentence structure and all of that. And basically everything goes through multiple rounds of revision. And that's why it's really important to be able to take criticism and work on making something better. I completely agree. So I will say that of a lot of the Daves we're covering, David Sedaris seems like a good guy overall. He seems like a good guy who made a hurtful joke that didn't land, and I don't think he believes this genuinely. But at the same time, it is important to know your audience, because I think it's completely valid that people were really hurt by what he said. It was poorly timed. It came from a place of like privilege. It felt like a punch down to a lot of people. And in humor, when you're punching down on people, that can feel really awful when you're in a worse situation than someone and they're making fun of you, or at least if it feels like they're making fun of you. But I understand how that wasn't his intention, so I can see the multiple angles to this issue. At the end of the day, I think the best solution is to always know your audience when you're working on something, and to always take into consideration what preconceived notions they're going into something with, what like the climate of the world is like at the time. Currently, we were towards not the beginning, it was the first year of the pandemic, right? Because this is a never ending thing at this point. But I think that there's something important to be said for that. But a lot of the Daves we're going to be talking about are just really bad people. So comparatively, this is a much milder stream. Whereas when we talk about some other people, it's going to be pretty bad. Tomorrow, for example, we're going to talk about Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports. I'm still doing some research on him, but tomorrow I will stream at the same time at 11 a.m. Central Time, noon Eastern, and we will talk about Dave Portnoy. We will talk about some of the issues with how he's run his company. We'll talk about some of the issues with how he's treated women. A lot of the stuff I'm seeing isn't looking very good. And a lot of people have told me that they think he's the worst Dave. So we've got a lot of worst Daves coming, you know what I mean? I think I agree with Heather here as well. Don't know if I'm just not the target audience, but the delivery was bad and the point of the joke wasn't funny. I'd be more forgiving if it was actually funny. And that's the thing too. I think I'm forgiving of humor that comes off as offensive or hurtful if it's well constructed and funny and it's clear what the point of the joke actually is. I think there was a lack of clarity here, and it was just a poor execution of the whole thing, which led to this whole mess happening in the first place. Dave Hollis definitely has main character syndrome. I completely agree. So I'm happy to hear all your guys' thoughts. I love seeing people's different interpretations of it in the chat, and you guys letting me know your thoughts on all of that. I think that just goes to show that target audience is important, and Chewy is barking in agreement. He's saying, know your target audience. My target audience is humans who love dogs, and that's why I'm barking in the background of this video. Chewy's very smart in that way. So don't forget to vote in the Forever Home Friends Cat Contest. If you haven't already, voting ends at the end of tomorrow. I will remind everyone and send the link again at the beginning of tomorrow's stream. We'll be back on Your Morning Guru again tomorrow to cover the last day of our Darman saga. We're finishing up Darman's Christmas special, which is interesting. So we'll be reacting to that tomorrow. And then next week on Your Morning Guru, we're going to follow Girl Defined, which is going to be a lot. Good thing I still have my modest clothes from Classically Abby week that I can use. So yeah, so that's about it. I appreciate you guys being here today. Thank you for joining me for the second Dave of Christmas. Tomorrow we will have the third Dave of Christmas. Yes, ranking people feels weird. It does, but I don't know. I ranked business books, ranking Daves. I don't know. It's very funny to me. I don't know why. If everyone thinks that that's going to be a bad look, let me know. Because like I said, knowing your audience is the number one most important thing. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Support small businesses. Have a fantastic Thursday. Love you all. Goodbye, friends.